Peppa Pig, the toy that grew teeth. The attic was always dusty, and no one went up there often. But one day, Daddy Pig decided to look for an old photo album and climbed upstairs. Instead of the album, he found a box. A very old one. A cardboard box wrapped in cloth, as if someone had tried to hide it long ago. Inside was a soft toy. Not a bear, not a bunny. Something unrecognizable. Pink, with 2 buttons for eyes and a black stitched smile. Its paws were short, the face wide, slightly crooked. "Oh, what an interesting find," said Daddy Pig, returning from the attic. "Must have been from the time we moved in." "How cute," said Mummy Pig. "We can let the children have it." "Can I keep it?" asked Peppa. "I'll call her Pinky." Peppa placed the toy on her shelf. Pinky just sat there, unmoving, silent, but the room instantly felt quieter. The next morning, Peppa noticed that Pinky's smile had grown wider. The thread had tightened, and between the stitches appeared tiny white notches. "George, did she have teeth?" "No," he said, stepping back. Each day, more teeth appeared. They seemed to grow out of the fabric itself. The toy was still soft, but inside something began to stretch. It felt heavier, denser. On the 3rd night, Peppa woke up to a strange noise, a wet chewing sound, quiet but unpleasant. She looked around and saw that Pinky was no longer on the shelf. She was sitting by the bed, her head slightly tilted, as if listening. Peppa wrapped herself tightly in her blanket and shut her eyes. In the morning, no one believed the toy had moved. She was back on the shelf. "Probably just fell," said Mummy Pig. On the 4th night, Daddy Pig was the one who woke up first. He heard scratching and decided to check the house. In the hallway, thin marks lined the wall, as if something sharp had been dragged along it. The scratches led to Peppa's room. "What's this?" he asked. "Maybe someone scratched the wall with a toy," said Mummy Pig. "Or maybe George was playing at night." But George just nodded. He didn't remember anything. By the 5th day, Pinky's teeth were clearly visible, small, neat, white. They protruded from the smile like a little predator's. If you listened closely, you could hear a faint clicking, as if her jaw moved slightly. Peppa hid the toy in a closet, wrapped her in a blanket. But by morning, she was back on the shelf, smiling wider. Now she had 2 rows of teeth. "George," Peppa whispered, "I think she bites us at night. I have a mark on my hoof." On the 6th night, Pinky wasn't just sitting. She was lying by the door, as if waiting for someone to leave. In the morning, new scratches appeared on the bedroom wall. On the floor, a wool thread pulled tight, as if yanked with force, and next to it, a tiny fragment of a tooth. The toy had vanished. Nowhere in the closet, not under the bed, not in the box. Only in the corner, behind the dresser, Daddy Pig found a shadow, slightly darker than the rest of the room. When he stepped closer, it faded. On the 7th night, Peppa heard something gnawing on the leg of her bed. Quick, desperate. Pinky had returned. She was no longer soft, no longer dusty. Now her smile was a solid row of teeth. Peppa Pig, the quiet room. It all started with a whisper. "Daddy, what's that door?" Peppa asked when she noticed it at the end of the hallway. Small, pale blue, with a faded plaque and no name. It hadn't been there before. "A door? Daddy Pig scratched his head. "Probably a closet. I never noticed it." But the door wouldn't open. No handle, no lock. Just a faint draft seeping from underneath. The next day, the door stood wide open, as if it had been waiting. Peppa carefully peeked inside. The room was completely empty. White walls, dusty floor, no furniture, no windows, and no sound at all, not even her own breathing. "Hello," she said. But there was no sound. None. No echo, no noise. Her voice vanished. Then Mummy Pig stepped in, tried to say, "What did you find, Peppa?" But nothing came out. Her lips moved, but the silence was like concrete. Daddy Pig clapped his hooves. Still nothing. Even footsteps made no sound in there. They started calling it the quiet room and decided to stay away from it. But George, on the third day, he disappeared. Daddy Pig searched the whole house. Peppa peeked into the quiet room and saw his hooves. He was standing in the corner, silent, still, not turning around. She ran to him and shouted, "George, let's go!" And he vanished, right in front of her eyes, as if he had dissolved. She tried to tell her parents, but no one believed her. The door slammed shut and wouldn't open again. The next morning, it was ajar. Inside, a dusty floor, and in the dust, 2 sets of hoofprints leading to the corner, but none leading back. Peppa took a notebook and pen, stepped inside, laid the notebook down, wrote, "Is there no way out?" The pen left no marks, as if anything connected to speech just disappeared. She stepped out. Silence rang in her ears. On the third day, she decided something had to be done. She entered the room, closed the door behind her, and then she heard it. Not a voice, a muffled moan. In the corner sat someone else, too tall, too thin, with a long face. It didn't move, but its eyes slowly blinked. Peppa clasped both hooves over her mouth, tried not to breathe, and then the figure turned its head, slowly, exactly. Peppa bolted from the room. Since then, she kept the door locked, taped shut. But every night, she heard heavy breathing behind it. And each morning, a message appeared on the wall near the door. "You spoke. Peppa Pig, the clock-eyed man." It all started quietly. No sound, no warning. One morning, Peppa looked out the window and saw that the house across the street was no longer empty. In the window stood a figure, tall, wearing a long coat. His face was unclear, but Peppa could feel he was staring straight at her. "Mummy, who is that?" she asked. "A new neighbor," Mummy Pig smiled. "He just moved in." "He's strange," Peppa said. "His eyes, they look like clocks." Mummy didn't pay much attention, but Peppa had seen them. The neighbor didn't have normal eyes. Instead, his face held 2 tiny clock faces. They turned slowly, like real mechanisms, and every time he looked at her, the hands began to spin faster. All day, he stood at his window. He didn't blink, he didn't move, just watched. With each day, he grew closer. First, at the window, then by his gate, then just standing on the road right across from their house. He never walked fast, but somehow he was always closer than the day before. Peppa started keeping the curtains closed, but she still felt his gaze. The ticking of his clock eyes echoed inside her head. Quiet, rhythmic. "Daddy," she said, "I don't like our neighbor." "Nonsense," Daddy Pig waved it off. "He probably just enjoys peace and quiet." But the nights were worse. At exactly 3 a.m., Peppa would wake up. Every night. Always at 3. She'd hear a mechanical sound, a crisp, deliberate tick, like someone was winding a clock. One night, she got up and went to the window. Outside, in the yard, he stood. His clock eyes spun wildly. He didn't move, but time around him felt wrong. "George?" she whispered. "He's here again." "Who?" George muttered sleepily. "The neighbor. He's watching me." "He watches every day." The next night, every clock in the house stopped. The wall clock, the ones in Mummy and Daddy's room, even George's toy clock, all frozen. But at exactly 3 a.m., they all started ticking again, slowly, loudly. Peppa got out of bed. The door to the hall was open. On the floor, a strange mark, round and faint, like someone had stepped with a foot shaped like a clock face. She crept to the living room. The TV was off, but its dark screen reflected a light, and in the reflection, he was behind her. She turned around. Nothing, but on the glass, a smudged imprint, circular, with a faint gear pattern. On the final night, he entered the house. No doors opened, no locks clicked. But Peppa woke without knowing why, and she felt it. He was inside. She sat up in bed, holding her breath. From beyond the door came the ticking, tick, 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 each second louder, each step closer. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't speaking. He was just getting nearer. When the door creaked open, Peppa saw his eyes. 2 clock faces, no hands, just endless motion, endless measuring. "Go away," she whispered. "Please." He didn't answer. He simply raised one hand. On it, another tiny clock, and its ticking stopped. Silence. In the morning, Peppa didn't come down for breakfast. Her room was empty. On her pillow lay 2 clock hands. No clock, and across the street, the house was dark again. Peppa Pig. The stranger. A new resident had come to town. No one knew where he came from. He simply appeared. A tall, white wolf with a long snout and a calm, 2 straight stare. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He only nodded when someone greeted him. Mummy Pig said he had bought the house on the edge of town. "He doesn't have anyone," she added. "Probably just wants peace and quiet." Daddy Pig nodded, but he seemed uneasy ever since. Peppa first saw the wolf near the shop. He stood still by the window, not looking at the products, but at his own reflection. She waved. He slowly turned his head and nodded. Slowly. His eyes didn't blink. After that, she started noticing him more often. At the bus stop, even though no buses came there. On the forest path. Sometimes walking down the street, but with no sound of footsteps. Then the nights began. The first night, Peppa woke up suddenly. She didn't know why. Just opened her eyes and looked at the wall. Everything was silent, but the room felt occupied. George was asleep beside her. The door was shut, the window dark. She thought it was just a dream. The second night, she woke again. A cold feeling washed over her. At first, silence. Then, breathing. Very soft, like someone was behind her. Peppa froze, turned. No one there. But in the morning, she noticed, the curtains were slightly open, even though Mummy always shut them tight. On the third night, she saw him. He stood in the corner of her room, the white wolf, tall. The moon's shadow passed through him, but his outline was clear. Eyes, black, lifeless. He didn't move, just stared, silently. Peppa screamed. Mummy and Daddy rushed in, but the room was empty. Mummy said, "It was just a dream." Daddy hugged her tightly, but his face was pale. He understood something, but said nothing. Peppa no longer slept alone. But that didn't help. On the fourth night, George woke her. He stood by the window, pointing outside. There, in the edge of the fog, near the street lamp, stood the wolf. His face couldn't be seen, just the silhouette, motionless. Peppa gripped George's hoof. From that night on, he came every night, and each night felt longer. Daddy Pig began locking the doors. Mummy shut every window. They stopped talking about it, just glanced over their shoulders. On the 6th night, Peppa woke and realized she couldn't move. George was asleep. The nightlight flickered, and in the doorway stood a figure, white, tall. He tilted his head. Slowly, he whispered, but there were no words, only sound, like the wind whispering through ears. Peppa woke up in tears, but the footprints on the floor remained. On the 7th day, Daddy was gone. He had gone out for bread and never returned. On the kitchen table lay a note. "He didn't leave. He's just with him now." Peppa didn't know who wrote it. Mummy just held her close. Since that night, they never turn off the lights. But someday, it'll turn on in her room anyway, and Peppa knows he won't leave until he takes someone else. Peppa Pig Tap Tap Tap. It started with a faint sound. One night, Peppa woke up to a soft tap tap tap. She sat up on her pillow, listened. Silence. Wind outside, rustling trees. Nothing strange. But as soon as she lay back down, tap tap tap. 3 short knocks, steady, as if someone tapped on the window. Probably my imagination, she whispered to herself. She forgot about it the next morning. The day went on as usual. George played, the parents laughed, everything felt calm. But at night, it happened again. Tap, 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 exactly at 2:13 a.m. On the third night, Peppa couldn't resist. She walked to the window and peered into the darkness. Nothing, no one, just the garden, swallowed in fog. She turned away and noticed, on the inside of the glass, hoof prints, as if someone had tapped from within. "George?" she whispered, but George was fast asleep. She checked. He hadn't moved. On the fourth night, Peppa stayed awake. Wrapped in a blanket, she sat watching the window. 2:13 a.m. Tap, tap, tap. Her heart clenched. She crawled closer, and for just a moment, it looked like someone was in the window's reflection. A figure, tall, thin, standing right behind the glass. But outside, there was no one. She shut the curtain and hid under the blanket. Didn't sleep until morning. In the daylight, everything seemed normal again. The marks on the glass had vanished. No one believed her. Daddy Pig said, "Just a draft." Mummy Pig smiled. Maybe it was a dream? Even George only shrugged. On the fifth night, she decided to write everything down. She opened a notebook, sat on the bed. 2:13 a.m. Tap, tap, tap. She jumped up and pulled open the curtain. Nothing, but in the reflection, her room, and another Peppa inside, standing by the bed, staring straight at the window. Was that the real one? Was she outside or inside? For a second, she didn't know who was who. She shut her eyes, counted to 10, opened them. The room was the same, but the glass, there was a word on it. "Let me in," drawn with a finger, from inside, on the misty glass. Peppa screamed and ran to her parents' room, but it was empty. No one. The beds weren't even made, as if no one had ever slept there. The hallway, dark, from her room, light, and a shadow approaching the window. Peppa stepped back, then heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Not on the window now, on her bedroom door, and a voice, just like hers. "Peppa, you promised to let me in." Peppa Pig. The Glass. One morning, Peppa went into the bathroom to brush her teeth. It was early and foggy, the light outside pale and grey. The bathroom lamp was on but dim, as if shining through mist. The mirror was fogged around the edges, but in the centre, there was a perfect clean circle, as if someone had wiped it from the inside. Peppa froze. She touched the glass with her hoof. The circle didn't smear. She looked at her reflection. It was her. But something was wrong. Her hand moved with a slight delay. The blinking was out of sync. The smile looked forced. A small, almost invisible misaligned version of herself. She stepped out without saying anything. But from that morning on, she never stayed long in the bathroom. She avoided looking in the mirror for more than a second. On the third day, she saw a crack, thin as a hair, running from the bottom corner toward the top, barely visible unless you knew it was there. She ran to get Mummy, but when they came back, the mirror was perfect again. No crack, no fog, no circle. "Must have been the steam," said Mummy. "Don't worry, sweetheart." Peppa didn't answer. The next morning, the crack was back, deeper, sharper, and the reflection was more off. Peppa twitched her ear. The reflection hesitated. She raised a brow. It copied her, but not quite right. The eyes in the mirror were emptier. That evening, Peppa returned alone. She stared into the mirror, long, still. Then she noticed the reflection shimmered, as if the glass were water and something behind it was moving. The next day, there was writing on the mirror, drawn with a fingertip from the inside. "Hello." Peppa wiped it off with shaking hooves, sat alone in her room, tried to forget. But the next morning, another word, "Let me in," then, "I'm almost out." Each morning, new phrases, each day, more cracks. Peppa hung a towel over the mirror, tried not to look at it at all, but she felt it, watching her, through fabric, through walls, through dreams. One night, she woke up. The bathroom door creaked open slowly. There was no light inside, but from within came a sound, fingers scratching glass. Steady, deliberate, like someone was writing. Peppa walked to the doorway, turned on the light. The mirror read, "Now you're inside." And the cracks had formed a web. Her reflection no longer mimicked her. It just stood there, head slightly tilted, mouth half open, eyes blank, and then it smiled. Peppa screamed, ran, locked herself in her room. That night, the mirror shattered with a soft, delicate sound. In the morning, there was no sign of it, only cold air, and a thin layer of dust on the floor in the shape of tiny hoof prints. When Mummy Pig came into the bathroom, the mirror was new, no cracks, no words, spotless. But when she looked into it, the reflection blinked first, and for a split second, just behind her shoulder, appeared a second Peppa face, slightly distorted, with a stretched grin and wide, unblinking eyes.